I think when we talk about trust, what comes out so readily is that trust evokes something deep in us. And that's because trust is something that goes, it's actually almost nearly at the bedrock of who we are. Talking about trust is hard, and you'll see as we go into this that talking about trust and then stepping into trust is really hard. And that's because underneath, our actions and our thoughts and our desires, and if you drill down deep enough, it all comes down to trust. But what I'm going to want you to take away here, and we'll come back to this at the end, is it's not about do you trust or do you not trust. It's about who or what are you putting your trust in. Because we're all trusting in something, right? We all have things or people or something that we are looking to, that we are relying on, we're leaning on for our satisfaction, for our well-being, for us to be happy or fulfilled. And so the question is not do I trust, but who or what am I trusting in? So hold on to that. We're going to be looking at the story of Jesus and Lazarus this morning, and that's in John chapter 11. Now, this is a bit of a long story, so I'll try and be a dramatic reader. I was never very good at that, but I'll try my best. I'm going to start at chapter 10. I'm going to read verse 31 and 39 for context, and then we'll jump in. Again, his Jewish opponents picked up stones to stone him. Again, they tried to seize him, but he escaped their grasp. Then Jesus went back across the Jordan to the place where John had been baptizing in the early days. There he stayed, and many people came to him. They said, though John never performed a sign, all that John said about this man was true. And in that place, many believed in Jesus. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago, the Jews there tried to stone you, yet you are going back? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. After he said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been dead in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Mary and Martha to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she sent out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know now that even now that God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives in me, lives by believing in me, will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they might believe that you sent me." Then when he said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth round his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. They believed in him. Believe. If the gospel writer John has a favorite word, believe must be it. The word we translate as believe is used over 100 times in John's gospel. If you want to compare, it's used like 10 in each of the other gospels. And today's story is no exception to John's trend. In our passage today, the word we translate as believe is used 9 times. However, John didn't use the word believe, did he? He wrote the gospel in Greek, and the verb he used was pisteuo. Now, to believe is a common English translation of pisteuo. However, we have to remember that the pisteuo didn't just mean to believe or to have faith to Greek speakers. No, pisteuo meant pisteuo. When English translators use words like believe or faith, they are merely trying to convey to your mind an understanding most similar to a Greek speaker and what they would have in mind when they heard the word pisteuo. But here's the challenge. Over time, the meaning of words may change. And when it comes to a word like believe, a lot has changed. The year 2014 was a bit of a turning point and marked the end of a decades-long mainstream culture war between science and faith, a war which pitted 2 true ways of knowing against each other and in the process caused irreversible damage to both. And in the process, the word believe took on a very altered meaning, one that is more ideological and less embodied, more naive and less calculated. Nowadays, here's the way believe is often defined: to hold an idea, story, or statement to be true. In other words, intellectual assent. I'll give you an example. If someone says, "I believe in aliens," what they are saying is that they think aliens exist. The problem with our word believe, then, is that belief in something or someone does not necessitate having a personal relationship with that person or thing. You can believe in something you have never experienced simply by holding it to be true in your head. This is a far cry from the intent of biblical pisteuo. Biblical belief is not just cognitive assent. It's actually relational commitment. Biblical belief is not just check a box beside this statement. It's more like giving yourself to someone in marriage. Bauer's Greek lexicon puts it this way: Pisteuo means to entrust oneself to an entity in complete confidence. To believe in with the implication of total commitment to the one who is trusted. Where this definition, well, it's a little wonky there. In this definition, where it most strikingly parts ways with our common understanding of belief today, is in the fact that biblical pisteuo, biblical belief, does in fact require action or a response from us. Jesus' call isn't just to believe in our heads, but to believe in our bodies also. Case in point, let's look back at verses 39 to 41 in our passage. When Jesus comes to Lazarus' tomb, he asks Martha to remove the stone. Rather than do what Jesus says, Martha counters with her own argument. Well, why should they remove the stone? Lazarus has already been dead 4 days, and they don't want to smell his body. She doesn't get the point. Jesus responds to Martha, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, pisteuo, you will see the glory of God?" Now remember, a few verses back, Jesus had literally just said this same thing to her, and her response then had been, "Yes, Lord, I believe." And so it says, they took away the stone. Jesus was imploring Martha to believe. And this passage clearly illustrates that Martha's belief in Jesus required action on her part. For Martha at this moment, to believe in Jesus was to remove the stone. To believe in Jesus was to remove the stone. To believe in Jesus isn't just to know in your head that Jesus is real, or even just to know that Jesus is capable of doing all these remarkable things. No, to believe in Jesus is to entrust yourself to Jesus to the point of complete confidence and even action. So let's throw this translation back in our passage at verse 25 and see how it sounds. Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who entrusts themselves to me to the point of confidence and action will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by entrusting themselves to me to the point of confidence and action will never die. Do you entrust yourself to this, to the point of confidence and action?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I entrust myself to this, to the point of confidence and action, that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into this world." Now, you can probably get why they didn't go with my translation. I'll admit it might be a little too wordy. But do you see the difference it makes in how we read this? If we are looking for a more concise translation than mine, I think the word that this whole service is about, the word trust, does the best job at getting at the real meaning. This is because, unlike the word believe, the word trust still retains some essence of confidence and action that is rooted in relationship. Again, unlike believe, we still get that if we're going to trust someone, we will have to be more open and vulnerable with them. We will have to rely on them, and we will actually make different decisions and actions because we trust this person. So all that to say, this story is all about trust. This story both exemplifies Jesus' pisteuo, his entrusting of himself to God the Father, to the point of confidence and action. And this story has the call for us to pisteuo, to trust ourselves to Jesus to the point of confidence and action. So let's look at ways in this passage which Jesus demonstrated trusting God in his timing. And through these, perhaps we will see situations in which we too are invited to trust God. Verse 5. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Huh? Did I read that right? Most of us would have expected, so when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he ran there at once without delay. But no, it says Jesus loves this family, and he stays where he is. He stays a full 2 more days. Jesus heard the bad news and then deliberately waited. Now, Jesus may have had his reasons, but those reasons weren't available to his disciples, to Mary and Martha, or to the 12 at that point. They would have to wait for the reason. Like we're learning this morning, to pisteuo, to believe or trust in Jesus, requires entrusting ourselves to him to the point where we are confidently able to live out of that trust and commitment. And as we'll get to next, sometimes trusting Jesus means following him somewhere that we don't want to go. But sometimes believing and trusting in Jesus means staying somewhere that we don't want to stay. In terms of a physical example, the practice of Sabbath is a great demonstration of this. Practicing Sabbath is pisteuoing God. It's a weekly practice of not doing the things that we want to, we feel we have to, in order for our world to be okay. And just like Jesus, there will be demands placed on us. There will be responsibilities where maybe like Martha and Mary, people will want or need something from us, and they will want or need it now. And we will have a choice: to pisteuo, to trust in God, or to trust in ourselves to save this world. Now, don't mishear me. I'm not saying Sabbath is a day to ignore the needs of everybody else. I'm not passing down laws. You will always have to use discernment. There will be times when you are requested and really should respond right away. But there will be other times where the invitation is to trust God and say no. However, in my experience, we have a tendency towards treating everything as urgent and everything as requiring our immediate attention. But sometimes the action, the step that trust requires, is the step of taking no steps. Sometimes to trust God is to do nothing when all you want to do is something, anything. Sometimes trusting God means staying exactly where you are, often somewhere you don't want to be. And this isn't always just a physical place. Sometimes it's an emotional place. Now, it's human nature to want to avoid negative feelings and run to the things that make us feel better. But sometimes trusting God means facing the things inside of yourself that you don't want to face. It means staying in the valley of the shadow of death and learning how to meet with God in the presence of grief, in the presence of loneliness, in the presence of emptiness. For Martha and Mary in our story today, trusting Jesus meant they had to stay in a place of grieving for 2 more days. By the time Jesus arrived back in Bethany, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. Now, in Jewish culture, someone was actually only officially dead after 3 days. Why? Maybe they had a few too many buried alive stories. And so if Jesus had gone once to raise Lazarus, maybe only, let's say, like 1 day after he died, a lot of people would have protested. They would have said, hey, maybe Lazarus never actually died. Maybe we just buried him prematurely. And so in Jesus waiting and trusting his Father, he was then able to raise Lazarus from the dead beyond all doubt. The staying in one place only made sense after the fact. And so it is often with us. Often we only find out why we waited after we do the waiting. Often we only find out why we had to face that painful emotion or scenario after we face it. And sometimes we never find out why. So for Martha and Mary today, trusting Jesus means staying somewhere that we don't want to stay, maybe physically or emotionally. But for the 12, believing in, trusting in Jesus meant following him somewhere that they didn't want to go. Let's go back to verse 5. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago, the Jews there tried to stone you. Yet you want to go back?" You see, Mary and Martha probably couldn't wait for Jesus to come back. And the disciples didn't want Jesus to go back at all. Both of them, in different ways, resisted God's timing and the intent of his plans. Yet, Jesus waits, and then he goes back to the area where very recently he was almost killed. You see, the town of Bethany is less than 3 kilometers from Jerusalem. It's about a 40-minute walk, where from not too long ago, a crowd of people tried to stone Jesus to death. In other words, if anyone saw Jesus in Bethany, they could be back within about an hour and a half with a mob to kill him. This was a dangerous decision Jesus made in going back. In this way, Jesus demonstrates that also trusting in God involves taking a step in a direction that we don't want to go. Now, here's the deal. At this point, I could tell you, go do the things that you don't want to do. Go step into the places that you don't want to step into. Maybe go talk to a neighbor. Go make peace with someone who has hurt you. Go confess your hidden sins. And if you are sensing an invitation from the Spirit to step into something that you don't want to do, I hope that you say yes. But as we've talked about already, all month, the problem isn't that we don't want to do the risky things that God is calling us to. Most of us do. The problem is that when we reach the moment, the key inflection point of action, lots of us just aren't able to follow through. In other words, like Martha in our story today, we confess that we believe in Jesus, we trust him, and then when the moment of action comes, we don't want to roll away the stone. And so I want to remind you, if you're in that place where you believe, where you trust, but you are consistently feeling like you're failing to actually live it out, I want to remind you that willpower alone is not enough. Trying harder just won't cut it. If your trust muscles aren't strong enough in the moment, rather than vainly trying harder, what we need to do is train. And practicing Sabbath, the spiritual practice that we are looking at this month, is a way that we train. It's a way that we grow our trust muscles so that when we find ourselves in a place where our trust in Jesus requires stepping out in a way that seems intimidating or scary, we will find that we are actually naturally stepping out without a second thought. Practices like Sabbath, they do something to us. They form us. They reprogram our bodies in a way so that our natural predisposition, our go-to, without thinking, responses and reactions change. In other words, you come to find yourself doing things that you never would have done because you don't just trust God with your head, you trust him with your whole body. Your body is geared towards trusting God. It's your new normal. And the beautiful thing is that when this trust really sinks into our bones, when stepping out becomes muscle memory, what we find is that God's danger is safer than our safety. You may have noticed Jesus makes this cryptic remark in our passage. He says, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by the world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." For Jesus, his relationship with God the Father was his guiding light. And he trusted that it is better to walk into danger under the bright daylight of God's loving will than it is to walk into what looks like safety under the darkness of our own limited understanding and perspectives. When we step out in trust, we find that the Spirit's invitations that seem scary or even dangerous at the outset actually bring us into more life and joy and peace than our own comforts we trusted in ever did. Because, like we started, all of us have our own comforts we trust in. All of us. When it comes to trust, everyone entrusts themselves to someone or something. The question is not do you trust, but rather who do you entrust yourself to? In other words, what or who do you rely on to reach the good life? The answers really are endless. But I want to help you get specific, because it is difficult to give your trust to God until you know what you are currently trusting on in his place. To do this, we're going to look at the 3 basic commodities that we all have and what we do with them. And those are your time, your money, and your thoughts. What do you devote most of your time to? What about your money, your income? What do you find yourself thinking about or dwelling on often? Because if you evaluate what and where you invest your time, your money, and your mental energy into, you will find out what you have entrusted yourself to for your well-being. I'm going to give you some examples. Maybe it's a savings account, or a paycheck, or a pension. Maybe it's a certain number of likes, or views, or followers. Maybe it's a spouse, or a boyfriend, or girlfriend. Maybe it's really delicious food. Maybe it's good drinks, good coffee. Maybe it's a university degree or some education. Maybe it's seeing friends or social outings. Maybe it's having fashionable clothing. Maybe it's TV shows and movies. Maybe it's sexual satisfaction, either in the context of marriage or outside the context of marriage. Maybe it's your accomplishments or your accumulations. Maybe it's your reputation. The list goes on, but whatever it is, whatever you need, whatever you rely on, whatever you trust in order to be okay, whatever it is, if it is not our loving God, it will let you down. Again, to clarify, created material things are not bad, and neither are relationships or accomplishments. These are good things. The problem is when we put these things in God's place and expect that if we can get enough of them, then we will be okay, then we will be happy, then we will be satisfied. But we won't. Only with Jesus do we find this deep soul-level fulfillment. Only in Jesus do we find true happiness. Only with Jesus, meeting with him in the quiet place, do we truly find peace. So my call, and I know it's a hard call, is to believe in Jesus, to trust in Jesus for your well-being, for all of the things that you need in this life. Like Matthew 7, seek first his kingdom, seek first his righteousness, and he will provide everything that you need. And again, before we end, it's important to remember trusting Jesus, pisteuoing Jesus, is not just deciding something in your head. It has to go beyond that. It's entrusting yourself in the context of a relationship into confidence and action. And so, if we want to trust in Jesus, we need to take a first step. And trusting Jesus, it will change your decisions. Trusting Jesus will change where and how much you spend or give away your income. Trusting Jesus will change your daily habits. Trusting Jesus will change what you do first when you get out of bed in the morning. Trusting Jesus will change your relationship to your phone. Trusting Jesus will change what you run to when you experience suffering and loss. Trusting Jesus will change how you see every person that you meet. Trusting Jesus will change how you respond when you don't get what you think you need to be happy. Trusting Jesus will lead you to stopping and resting when the whole world tells you to keep moving. Trusting Jesus will lead you to places that you avoided because you thought that they might kill you. But now that you've gone through them with Jesus, you realize that true life was on the other side all along. Trusting Jesus is the only way to live. Let's take a moment and be still. Jesus, you invite us to trust you, to rely on you, to depend on you. But we confess, trusting in you is really hard. I confess all the ways that I go to so many other things before you to make me feel happy or fulfilled or whole. But God, nothing ever satisfies but you. You are like living water, that when we thirst and drink of you, we never thirst again. And when we thirst and drink of you, we find that normal water no longer quenches our appetite like it used to. Spirit, Holy Spirit, give us a way, give us a prompting, give us a step that we can take into trusting you more. We don't just want to believe in you in our heads, but we want to believe in you with our whole lives. We want to be a people who don't just talk the talk, but actually live the life and experience the abundant life that you made for us. And like Beth said this morning, it's all you. We have a very small part to play. We have our 2%. And it's only by your strength that we can actually do that 2%. But give us the strength. Give us the will. Give us the reliance that we can step out into trusting you in whatever that looks like in our weeks this week. Maybe that's practicing Sabbath. And maybe that's turning our phone off. Maybe that's saying no to that thing that we tend to look towards other than you to make us happy. Whatever it is, would we recognize that you don't want to deprive us of good things? You just know that you yourself are the very best thing, and that apart from you, we will not find the satisfaction that we were made for. So we want to come to you. We want to give up all these attachments, these things. And we want to run to you. Rest in your grace, in your mercy, in your love. And be transformed by walking in trust. Amen.